Greetings! Thanks to everyone for coming out to our group author reading. This reading is brought to you by Strong Women's Strange Worlds, which is a group of authors supporting authors. Our mission is to elevate the voices of women and other underrepresented gender identity authors of science fiction, fantasy, and horror through our events like our bi-monthly virtual quick read sessions. You can find out more about Strong Women's Strange Worlds through the handout we'll provide in the chat and by visiting our website, a link of which we will throw up in the chat, and it's strongwomenstrangeworlds.weebly.com. I'm your host today, Kate, and you can find out more information about me in that handout as well. Today, we'll be featuring 6 authors: F. Deal, Sarah Raughley, Eugenia Triantafyllou, Clarke, Jacqueline West, and Stephanie Burgis. Our first reader is F. Deal. F. Deal writes speculative fiction and is an assistant fiction editor at Abyss and Apex Easy. Her work has been published in various magazines, including fantasy and science fiction. Her first novel, Esprit de Corps, a steampunk paranormal romance set in 1840s France, is forthcoming from eSpec Books. F, take it away.
Thanks so much, Kate. Thanks for having me. And as Kate said, I'll be reading an excerpt from this novel, which is coming out from eSpec Books within the next year. And the series is set in France in the 1840s, which is before all of the technological advances that gave us steampunk. So I kind of like to call this a STEMpunk novel. Jacqueline is a prodigy in engineering, and Angelique, her twin sister, is a free spirit. She was a piano virtuoso as a teen, but while touring Europe, she had a mysterious attack that left her as a shape-shifting wolf. And in her wolf form, she has now been taken on to the airship run by the evil Count Dragunov, along with her lover, Llewellyn. Jacqueline and Alain de Guise, who is an agent of espionage for the King of France, are racing to the Paris catacombs in order to stop the Count's blood ritual, which will steal all of the spirits of those skulls that you see behind me to animate his automaton army. Jacqueline stopped at the sound of a musketoon. What was that? She reined in her horse in a panic, but de Guise blocked her. Angelique, I have to go back. No, Jacqueline, you can't. Terror blinded her. But I can't just leave her. Mon Dieu, mon ange. She tried again to urge her horse. De Guise took her arm. We don't know if it is Angelique in peril. I do. I felt it. I feel it. Jacqueline could not explain what it meant to be a twin, to sense what the other suffered, to know what the other needed. We don't know who fired the shot or why, de Guise argued. But Jacqueline, Mirek has his precious skull, and they will finish their task as quickly as possible. We must get there before they do. Jacqueline, she will live, I promise you. Jacqueline threw him off. She's not safe while she's in the hands of that ghoul, Mirek. Once again, he blocked her from turning. That ghoul is planning to resurrect the dead, to animate his automatons this very night. He must hurry to do that in order to march them back to the ship before dawn. Dragunov will not interrupt that plan for anything. Your engineering was installed in these models, and he cannot afford their being discovered, nor can you. Jacqueline's heart ached. She couldn't breathe for grief. She choked back a sob. De Guise said, I promise you will see your sister again, alive. As you know, the ship cannot leave without Mirek, and I swear Mirek will not survive this night. Jacqueline trembled with a desperate ache, but she surrendered, falling in beside him. She couldn't stem her tears. De Guise gave her his handkerchief, but he said nothing further. Jacqueline expected they would return to the city, but de Guise turned them aside just past the observatory grounds and before the retreat house. They followed a small rill, until they came to a mining adit, long since fallen into desuetude. We go on foot from here, Digis said, dismounting and tethering the horses. Jacqueline nodded. She barely felt her limbs anymore. Her world was upside down. Her head understood Angelique would survive anything shot from a gun, but how long would it take her to revive? What if Llewellyn was the target? Was Angelique now in the hands of Myrick, unprotected? Jacqueline shivered, unable to still the doubts in her heart. De Guise wrapped his arm about her, and she leaned to him as they descended into the underworld. They followed a set of rail tracks, through a tunnel so low they both had to hunch down to pass. Lime water began to rise, but at its deepest only covered Jacqueline's boots. The corridor soon widened. The waters receded, and there was a light ahead of them. They were approaching the catacombs proper, now closed off from the public, but still lighted by gas fixtures for the workers reinforcing the unstable areas. Jacqueline roused herself to match de Guise's pace. Plaques on the wall told them they had reached the Place d'Enfer, a good 30 meters above them. Further on, a macabre warning welcomed them. Arrête! C'est ici l'Empire de la Mort. Stop. This is the Empire of Death. Not yet it isn't, Jacqueline muttered, and not if we can stop it. They passed similar morbid reminders of their surroundings, carved into the blocks. A bit of verse, a wry adage, a romantic reflection, a philosophical note. Tunnels whose walls were piles upon piles of long bones and skulls stretched before them, with engravures of the original cemeteries represented, memorials to sepultured notables, and various pillars of historical reference. Oddly, Jacqueline felt no sense of gloom amid these surroundings. There was a peaceful acknowledgment of mortality that resounded more with life than death, and hope rekindled in her. They finally arrived at a small circular room comparatively well lit. To each side of the chamber a corridor tunneled off. The ceiling was high enough they didn't have to bend down, and it was supported by stone pillars at either side of a granite bowl, like a fountain, upon a short plinth. The walls were constructed of long bones and decorated with a mosaic of skulls. Beyond the plinth, the far end formed an alcove, where the osseous wall stopped 1/2 meter short of the ceiling. Jacqueline halted. She had seen this dry fountain before, in a dream. Was it only 3 days ago the Janissary had stopped atop this brazier and called her to waken from her dream, leading her instead to this nightmare? What is it? De Guise asked. She shook her head. What is this place? De Guise took in the small cavern. They call it the Crypt of the Sepulchral Lamp. It's an overly romanticized name. In former days, miners used that brazier to gauge the oxygen flow in the corridors. When the fire guttered, the workers evacuated until the next day. A rush of clarity swept over Jacqueline. This is it. This is where it will happen. Myrick needs to do a blood ritual. She ran her fingertip along the rim of the brazier. This will be his altar. Esprit de Corps is going to be released within the next year, and you can follow the updates and the news on how the whole series is progressing if you follow my blog or on my website, which I think the links are in the chat. I do not have giveaways for today, but I've got a lot of them on my website. So if you sign up there and check under free stuff, you can see all the things that I work on. Thank you so much for listening.
That was so good. And listen, to anybody that's new to this is my problem. Every time I'm the host, people get to this point and then they stop and I go, no, don't stop. So we'll have to talk later. Maybe you'll have to do a reading for me. Anyway, our second reader is Sarah Raughley. Sarah Raughley is an author, writer, and academic. While currently teaching at Lakehead University, she is also a freelance columnist and emerging young adult author whose novels and short stories are published around the world. Her most recent work is The Bones of Ruin, about an African tightrope dancer facing the apocalypse in the 19th century. Sarah, over to you.
Hi, everybody. I'm Sarah Raughley. And yeah, the Bones of Ruin, I like to sort of see it as 19th century supernatural Hunger Games. It repopulates Victorian London with actual people of color, which I think is so needed. And in this book, there's a secret society of Europe's elites that believe that the apocalypse is coming and they're getting ready to colonize a new world. But in order to sort of think about, to decide amongst themselves who will be the leader of the new world, they decide to hold this tournament. And so each sort of member of the committee of the group has their own group of superpowered heroes that are kind of fighting to the death, and it's really cool. So definitely take a look. And I'm going to read from the prologue. So, before the cataclysm, October 1st, 1884, 925 days since the Spring Day Massacre. A second set of knocks on the front door once again interrupted Adam Temple's very important business. All right, Adam muttered, closing his hooded eyes as he stayed his hand. Ever the persistent one, that woman. But it was no more than a minor annoyance. With the rain beating the arched windows and the wind howling in the darkness outside, providing shelter to his esteemed visitor came first. It's what a gentleman would do, even in this situation. Indeed, he'd given his servants the night off, so the door was his to get. Straightening up, he casually tossed his bloody knife onto the mantel of the roaring cast iron fireplace. He looked fondly upon the golden-framed portrait of his mother, the Baroness, hanging above it. She had been a puritanical woman, lovely and stoic, her braided brown hair muted by canvas oils. Her authoritarian gaze aimed daggers at him. Now, don't look at me like that, Mother, he thought with a little grin before heading out to the foyer. The rapping on the door made the crystals of the chandelier above him jingle brightly like bells, their light dancing along the dark carmine walls. To his left, a clay bust of his father, John Temple, cowered in the corner behind the twisting wooden staircase, but Adam spared no time for it. He would return to him later. The rapping had evolved into a frenzied pounding. How typical of Madame. Don't be so impatient, Violet, he whispered as his hand reached for the knob. The open door revealed a beautiful woman standing in the granite threshold of his family manor, a woman who tried very hard the moment she caught sight of his blue eyes to transform her frustrated scowl into a pleasant, welcoming smile. Madame Violet Belrose was the very vision of a lady. Not a splash of rain had touched her long black gloves, nor her burgundy overdress, the same color as her gathered-up hair, because her servant, a dreadful-looking man soaked from head to toe, with the expression and pallor of a corpse, held up a black umbrella to keep her dry. Her skirt fell straight at the front, but draped elaborately at the back, billowing majestically below the waist as she crossed the doorway. Well, she said, her own pearl-colored parasol, an unopened decoration in her hands. Isn't it always lovely to visit Yorkshire at night? Her French accent was as solid as the pearls draped around her neck. She turned to her servant. Pierre, you'll wait outside, won't you? She didn't wait for an answer before she slammed the door in the wet man's face. The wind and rain raged on behind it. And now they were alone. My, the weather is just terrible. She inched closer to him, her boots crisp against the marble. Feels like the end of days, doesn't it? Adam wasn't surprised when her slender fingers found his cheek sooner than he could blink, caressing his jawline up to his admittedly very unkempt black hair. The first time he'd met her 7 years ago, his father had entertained her in his manner. Anna was 14 at the time, home from Eton, and she more than a decade older, but he could feel the illicit hunger in her eyes for him even then, as sure as he could now. It wasn't a particularly pleasant experience or an unpleasant one. Her touch never shook his heart one way or another. Dealing with Madame Belrose in any capacity required care and the utmost precaution. She was one of the more intelligent members of the committee, after all. And while all of the members could brag of wealth, power, and an impressive body count, not all could boast of superior intellect. When in the presence of Madame Belrose, it was imperative that he be in complete control of himself. It was balancing on the edge of a knife. My Adam, you only grow more handsome every time I see you. She rested her finger under her red lips, as it were the sword of Damocles dangling above his head, her thumb caressing her pointed chin in amusement. Beautiful balanced features, delicate and fairy-like, soft like a woman's, and yet so masculine in its shape. She admired him like a painting that she could never have, no matter how many times she asked, and she had asked many times. Though your hair could use a bit of a comb, young man, she added in a scolding tone unsuited to her. He could feel her fingers grazing his scalp as she ran them through his hair. Despite that little oversight, I'm sure any young British lady would just die to be your wife. If we hadn't killed your father, I'm sure he would have set up an arrangement immediately. Scoffing, Adam stepped away from her, widening the distance between them to a more comfortable degree. In my life, my father was never interested in such things. He could barely stand me. He certainly didn't trust me. I suppose he was right in both regards. As if she'd suddenly grown bored of his beauty, she peeked into the living room. Her blue eyes glinted dangerously, and certainly not because of the new neoclassical furniture he'd just brought to the estate. She was used to the expense of things. She'd inherited many of her family's part in the slave trade, the abolition of which, she always maintained, was one of France's biggest mistakes. Why, that monsieur, might he be? With a gentlemanly sweep of his arm, Adam gestured for the madame to enter first. You are a loyal boy, aren't you? As loyal as the committee needs me to be. A smart boy, too. Madame Belrose scurried into the living room. It was a spacious room where his family used to spend much of their time together when all were alive. The parlor in the east wing was another close favorite, a particular joy for his Uncle Byron, now sadly committed. But by the sudden drop of her long face, Adam knew the carnage was clearly too contained for her taste. Golden framed portraits of the Temple family lined the floral walls and mocked her with their spotlessness. Along with his mother, sandwiched between two golden light fixtures above the fireplace, there was his cherubic little brother and beloved older sister, his grandfather, and a space where his father's portrait used to be, a painting that now lay discarded in a closet somewhere, gathering dust. On one side of the fireplace, a bust of Michelangelo's David, bloodless, with not even a scratch upon it, and on the other, a low mahogany rocking chair next to a handcrafted gold-trimmed monopodial table, carvings telling ghoulish stories along its single leg, clean. No broken mirror, no intestines draped across the piano. Adam had kept the carnage to a minimum. The only blood in sight dripped from the chest, arms, and lips of the graying middle-aged man tied to a chair in the center of the living room and collected in a respectable crimson pool on the earth-toned Persian rug. Adam was never one for a mess, but Madame Belrose had a taste for the macabre. So he did what he could for her within reason. He picked the bloody knife back up off the mantle. And I'll leave it there. So for anyone interested in more of the Bones of Ruin and even a prize, I'm not giving away anything right now, but I will be giving away things soon, including this cool set of bookmarks. You should go to sarahraughley.com, and I'll type that in the chat just to see when I'm doing that giveaway. And you can follow me on TikTok, Twitter, and Instagram at Sarah Raughley to know when I'm giving things away and holding various things. So thank you.
Ah, that was so good. But again, he picks up the knife and you stop reading to me? Come on, guys. All right. Well, the next reader that's going to break my heart by stopping at such a critical moment is Eugenia Triantafyllou. Eugenia is a Greek author and artist with a flair for dark things. Her short fiction has been nominated for the Ignite, Nebula, and World Fantasy Awards, and she is a graduate of Clarke West Writers Workshop. You can find her stories in Uncanny, Apex, Strange Horizons, and other venues. She currently lives in Athens with a boy and a dog. Take it away, Eugenia.
Hello. I'm probably not going to break your heart because this is a flash. So I'm probably not going to stop before stabbing. I'm probably going to stop after stabbing. So it's a flash that I published in Apex in 2018. It's like gothic horror style, and it's called Cherrywood Coffin. So here we go. The voices begin 3 days before someone is to die. The coffin maker wakes up covered in sweat. He has been talking in his sleep again, his wife says, in the language of the dead. He looks at her under the waning light of the candle. Edna's face is pallid and lined with a liquid transparency. Dark circles nestle under her eyes. He kisses her cheek and goes to work in the middle of the night. The coffin must be of mahogany. He knows that already. An important person will die, a person of wealth and power. He will figure out the rest as he goes. The coffin whispers louder and more coherently as the days pass. No, the Harwood explains as he tries to note the measurements. Not for an adult. This will be a child's coffin. He clenches his fists and his head stoops more than usual, but he keeps on with his work. All this time, the coffin maker is locked in his basement alone. Only once a day does his wife come downstairs to bring him bread and tea. She caresses his hair as he leans over his woodwork. She covers her mouth with a handkerchief. A stain of blood stains its whiteness. Go rest, Edna. You're sick. The client comes on the second day, as the coffin maker picks the coffin's fittings. They're shaped like golden doves that fly towards the sky, albeit wounded. Seems most appropriate. She's wrapped in a red velvet shawl and smells of expensive soap. The coffin cuts in. She's the mother. She sits on the only chair he keeps in the basement. He offers her tea, but she refuses politely. When she lowers her shawl, the coffin maker recognizes her. Mrs. Kriegs, the merchant's wife. She's upfront about it. Her son is dying, she says. Won't be long. Surely he knows. She points at the expensive casket on his workbench. The coffin maker's face tightens. Please, she says. My boy, my beautiful, fragile boy. Her voice breaks, but she retains an air of pride people of her class naturally have, even when they're begging. She offers him gold, double, no, triple what her husband will pay for the coffin. He doesn't even have to do it himself. She has people. They will take the coffin and turn it into kindling. Then her boy can stay with her forever. He won't face the darkness. The coffin maker avoids the woman's stare. It's against the law, he says, trying to sound stern. He wishes he were at ease, that the woman would bow and apologize for the disturbance, then open the door and leave. But she stays there, with her red eyes, her pouch of gold. I won't put my boy in the ground. The coffin maker sighs. She's not the first to ask him this, and she won't be the last. She doesn't know what she's asking, though. That's the reason there are laws about this. The dead must be allowed to rest. Follow me, madam, he says. The woman gives him a perplexed look, but gets up and follows him upstairs. His walking is slow, burdened. Hers is light and rhythmic, more like dancing. He can hear her heels tapping on the stairs. He gestures towards the closed door at the back of the house. Darling, is that you? Edna's voice comes from inside. The smell as they approach is putrid. The woman brings a scented handkerchief and gets her nose. He stops in front of the door and turns to face her. Mrs. Creeks pauses and takes a step back. I don't want to go in there, she says. He opens the door wide, and lets her peer inside. Even in the half darkness of the closed drapes and the candlelight, she can see the unnatural shape, the empty eyes. The handkerchief falls to the ground, and Mrs. Creeks flinches. A muffled scream escapes her lips. I'm sorry, coffin maker says, but she's already on her way out. It's late, and the coffin maker has to finish the job. He has to varnish the casket. Tomorrow the child will die, and once he is in the coffin, it will finally fall silent. But the cherry wood pile he keeps buried in the basement will never leave him alone. The end. So that's it by me. If you want to read something longer and something more recent, I have a murder mystery science fiction colony story novella in Uncanny magazine, and it's also eligible for all the awards this year. Thank you very much.
I don't even have any words. That was so good. Congratulations. Our fourth reader is Cy Clarke. Cy Clarke is a Canadian misanthrope who lives in Deptford, Sarfest, London. I know I said that wrong, but it's okay. As someone who's neurodivergent, an immigrant, and the proud owner of an invisible disability, she strives to present a realistically diverse array of characters in her stories. Go, Cy.
Thanks. Sorry. Sorry. This is from The Left Hand of Dog. A big booming voice announced, "The prisoner in cell A will step forwards." Did they mean me? Was this cell A? How was I supposed to know? I stood up and patted Spock's head as she joined me. You're such a good girl, Spock. A larger door, about 1.5 meters in height, opened next to the smaller door the food tray had been shoved through. Green and purple bunny boos were both standing just the other side. I bent down to duck through the door and stepped forwards, but Purple stabbed at me with some sort of truncheon. Not you. Step back. What? You want to question my dog? What information do you think she has? Spock padded towards the door, clutching her brain between her teeth, then turned to face me. She dropped the toy at my feet. Lem no panic. Spock, good girl. No, I don't care. You can shoot me again if you want, but you're not taking my dog. I stamped my foot like the disgruntled toddler I apparently was. Moving to stand in front of Spock, I put my hand on her. Spock walked calmly around me, then turned to face me once again. Stay. She walked out the door. It swung shut behind her, locking me alone in the cell. Sorry, one sec. I've lost my place. She walked out the door. It swung shut behind her, locking me alone in the cell. I read this bit. I'm sorry. I slapped the wall pointlessly. The panic I'd staved off while Spock was still in the room was creeping back up my insides. Ow! I rubbed my hand on the brushed cotton of my pajama bottoms. What the hell am I supposed to do now? I demanded of no one in particular. Please restate the question, replied Holly. As I paced the room, I demanded, where the hell did those fluffy arseholes take Spock? I swear, if they hurt her, I ground my teeth. I don't actually know what I'll do, but it won't be pretty. Spock has been taken for questioning, replied Holly. She will not be harmed. I forced my anger and frustration aside. As much as I was concerned for Spock, I wouldn't get anything by being belligerent. Instead, I needed to gather as much information as I could. Who are you, Holly? Why is it you're talking to me, but your friends are only interested in what Spock has to say? To answer your first question, I am your personal translation device. Translators do not normally speak to any other sentience. Your captors are most likely speaking to Spock about the crimes for which she has been arrested. I stopped in my tracks. Arrested? What do you mean arrested? I tried to swallow the terror. It was hard to think rationally. What crimes are you suggesting my dog has committed? Is she going to be okay? With regard to your first three questions, I'm sorry, but I'm not party to that information. As for her well-being, the no frame of reference convention of no frame of reference dictates that she not be harmed. She must be safely delivered to the court on no frame of reference to stand trial. Oh, okay, well, that's something at least, sort of. I closed my eyes. If Spock's the one who's been arrested, why are you talking to me, not her? I am your translator and personal AI, said what had been a perfectly ordinary smartwatch yesterday. Yeah, but why aren't you Spock's translator? You've got to admit I've got you there, right? Please restate the question. Why were you assigned to me? I opened my eyes and stared at the featureless wall in front of me. There was almost certainly a camera somewhere, though I couldn't see one. Each individual who doesn't already have a translator is assigned one. I was installed on your watch. Spock didn't have a device suitable for an AI, so one was given to her. That explained the new caller, at least. It was fitted with an identical translator, though over time, the differences between AI units increase as they adapt to their owner's preferences. That made me sit up. So why can't I hear when Spock's device is speaking to her? The answer occurred to me just as Holly said. Spock's device speaks at a frequency not detectable by human ears. Was all I could muster as I flopped down on the bed, dejected. Spock had been gone for a while. Despite Holly's assurances that she was okay, I was worried. The anxiety felt like a rock in my chest. Initially, you can set me in either literal or figurative mode, said Holly. Over time, I'll learn your personal preferences for how best to relay information to you. I scrunched up my face. What do you mean? My personal AI did not sigh at me. It definitely didn't. At present, I have not been set to either literal or figurative mode, and I don't know enough of your personal preferences to make a reasonable guess. So there are gaps in our conversation where there is no common frame of reference. If you instruct me to use literal mode, I will endeavor to explain alien concepts precisely in order to aid your acquisition of knowledge. If you set me to figurative, then, to facilitate expedient communication, I will choose the closest corollary drawing from your own mind. This will include facts you already know but may have forgotten. I will also incorporate extrapolative and fictional sources. Your extensive knowledge of science fiction will provide a useful base for figurative mode. For instance, when you asked earlier about the composition of your meal, I could have explained that the primary bulk was derived from the root of a plant native to the fourth planet of a star system you have no name for in the galaxy you think of as NGC 5128. The root is known for providing complex carbohydrates and for its ability to absorb flavors. Or I could have said it was a cassava. This would not have been factual in a literal sense, but it would have conveyed a basic understanding with fewer words. Oh, yeah, do that then, the figurative thing. I was feeling more than a bit overwhelmed. As you wish, said Holly. The low door opened again and Spock returned, ears back and tail between her legs. She plodded to the edge of the bed. I reached for her, relief flooding my system. She buried her head in my armpit. Want to go home? Yeah, I know, mate. Me too. She looked up at me. Spock, good girl? The bestest, I replied, stroking her fur. She climbed up onto the bed and nuzzled into me. How are we ever going to get home? That's it.
Puppy. Oh, that was so good.
Thank you. Sorry for the technical difficulties. It's not my
Happens
computer.
to all of us. All right. Our fifth reader is Jacqueline West. Jacqueline West's work includes the New York Times best-selling middle grade dark fantasy series, The Book of Elsewhere, the young adult horror novel, Last Things, and the middle grade ghost story, Long Lost. An award-winning poet and active HWA member, Jacqueline lives with her family in Red Wing, Minnesota. Take it away.
Right. Hi, everyone. Thank you so much. Yes, I am Jacqueline West, not Jacqueline, brilliant engineer in 1840s Paris, unfortunately. I'm going to read a little bit of Last Things, my most recent YA horror novel. This is essentially my modern-day Minnesotan metal reimagining of the old legend of the musician who might have sold his soul to the devil. And it's told through two alternating narratives. There's Anders, the 18-year-old guitar prodigy, and Thea, who is a strange new girl in his small Minnesota town, who's basically Anders' biggest fan, his stalker, perhaps something more. This is a short chapter from Thea's viewpoint near the end of the book. My father used to bring me stones. Nearly every day he'd come home from repairing a boat somewhere, and in his pocket there would be a stone, smooth and water-polished, from whatever river or lake he'd been near. Baptized in the waters of the River Jordan, he'd say, because all rivers are one river, really. Every river, every raindrop, all flowing to the sea. It took time for me to see the power in them, in the flowing water and in the stones. But then I started to build the circles of river-washed stones around my bed, around our house, around the scrubby edges of whatever yard was temporarily ours. As long as the circle was whole, we were safe. My father didn't approve. He thought it was pagan, witchy, more magical than holy. But I knew the truth. There's not much difference. My father's always been this way. He argues with Aunt May about her cards and her whiskey and her Bible scrying. When she asks the book a question and opens it to a random passage, he argues with me, at me. I understand. He isn't one of us. He's always on the lookout for the things he calls evil. He sees them on TV, in music, in other people's churches, but he can't see what we see, the places where the evil slides in, the spots where the world is a little too thin and too dark and too full of hiding places. My father and I used to move around a lot, river to lake to river. In each new spot, he would find a church and then slowly begin to disagree with the pastor's way of doing things until he'd launched a whole holy war in his mind. Then he'd go off on his long nights, drinking, preaching, standing thigh-deep in the river. Every now and then he'd get a warning or a fine from the police. Public intoxication, disturbing the peace. A few times something larger happened, something that might have tied him to some old barn or building that had suddenly burned down, and we'd leave town with the smell of smoke still billowing behind us. Sometimes I had to leave before my own work was done. I lost some. The ones I couldn't keep inside the circles, the ones who were already half gone. It just made me work harder. My father had been gone on a week-long bender/baptizing spree when I learned about Anders, up near Aunt May's place in Greenwood. May had been seeing things, hearing things, but she couldn't go out and do the work herself. a fragile old woman lurking around a high school, hanging out at a noisy coffee house. She called us, spoke to my father, told a white lie about her health and the truth to me. We all decided I should move in with her back home, if the Malcolms can be said to have a home. Aunt May and my father were born just outside Greenwood. The family has lived in the area longer than anyone can trace, in part because they had to change names and homes so many times. My ancestors had a gift for getting run out of town. When someone is present wherever and whenever bad things happen, always turning up stained with blood or ash, always arriving too promptly for coincidence, people decide one of two things. Either someone has a gift for helping, always being in the right place at the right time, or that someone is behind the bad things themselves. I know what people usually choose. Still, Aunt May has stayed in Greenwood, keeping to herself in that house outside of town because she knows she's needed here. Darkness takes whatever space it's given. Small towns, back roads, deep forests. The woods outside Greenwood have given it plenty of space. Maybe I'll try to explain this to Frankie later tonight. I've told her about the searches, all the hundreds of people lining up to comb the woods. It's good for her to know that people are looking, to think that they're getting closer to finding her. It keeps her from getting desperate, from trying to break out on her own. I visit the root cellar twice a day, make sure her ropes are secure, that she has water and enough to eat. Then I sit on the steps, just for a few minutes. She always tries to keep me talking. She wants to keep me there for as long as she possibly can. She's asked all about my family, about me and Aunt May and my father. I give her fragments, the whiskey that soaks through both of them. My father, fixing boats, the way he'd bring me pretty stones. She's told me about her family, too, her mother and her father and her brother Leo, her grandparents, her adorable little cousin Emilio, the way they all get together for Sunday dinner twice a month. The cellar still smells like earth, but there are other smells in it now. Smells of fear and sweat and passing time. Frankie's legs are tied with rope much too thick to break or fray, no matter how she picks at it, and the rope knots around each of her ankles and weaves behind the shelves that are bolted to the wall. She can move around the cellar, get water or food, use the lidded bucket in the corner, but she can't climb higher than the first step. By the time I've shut the door and covered it again, I can barely hear her screaming. I think of all this as I ride through the woods, paralleling Anders' path toward town. I'll beat him to the music studio, hide in the shadows of the alley and wait until he steps inside. I will watch. I will watch, because evil will use any weakness. The moment I stop, that's when they'll slip in. Okay, so that's a little bit of Last Things. It is out now in hardcover and paperback, hopefully in a bookstore near you from Green Willow HarperCollins. Thanks so much. Oh, and there's a giveaway. You can get a signed copy as well.
So good. I love that, like, evil will, do anything, says the person with somebody tied up. Anyway, our final reader for the day is Stephanie Burgis. Stephanie Burgis grew up in East Lansing, Michigan, but now lives in Wales with her husband and 2 sons, surrounded by mountains, castles, and coffee shops. She writes wildly romantic adult historical fantasies, most recently Scales and Sensibility and Good Neighbors, as well as fun middle grade fantasy adventures. Take it away, Stephanie.
Hi, I am going to start with the beginning of chapter 1 of Scales and Sensibility and then skip to the end. So chapter 1. It was a truth universally acknowledged that any young lady without a dragon was doomed to social failure. But it was becoming increasingly obvious to everyone in Hathergill Hall that for Penelope Hathergill, actually having a dragon would guarantee disaster. Mother! Penelope's piercing shriek rattled the glass in the chandelier above her. He's done it again. Oh, dear. Lady Hathergill closed her eyes and sank back in her chair, waving a limp handkerchief in the general direction of her niece. Do see to that, won't you, Eleanor? Yes, Aunt. Sighing, Eleanor folded the mending she'd been working on and rose to help her cousin. It was a servant's job to clean most messes, but the maids had mutinied several days earlier, and the dour housekeeper, Mrs. Braithwaite, who intimidated even Penelope, had announced that she too would give notice if any of her girls were asked to touch that foul creature's mess again. And as Penelope herself could never be expected to clean up any of the messes that she caused, well, That left Eleanor again. Please stand still, Penelope, she said, as she wiped at her cousin's back with a handkerchief, if you want me to get it all off. It's disgusting. Penelope wriggled impatiently and glared at the brightly colored dragon perched on her shoulder. And it's all your fault, horrid creature. With a sudden, impatient gesture, she reached up and pushed him off her shoulder. Rock! His tiny cobalt blue wings fluttered uselessly. He tumbled snout over tail, heading straight for the ground. Penelope! Eleanor dropped her slime-covered handkerchief and dived for the falling dragon. She grabbed him just in time and gathered him up to her chest, stroking his hot skin consolingly. What were you thinking? You know his wings were clipped by the breeder. He could have been hurt. He deserves it. Penelope crossed her arms and glared down at him. He knows perfectly well what he's doing, I can tell. Just before he let it out that time, I heard him laugh out loud. It hadn't been a laugh. That chortling sound was a sign of fear in dragons. Eleanor had read about it when she'd first learned that the family was buying a dragon for Penelope's social debut. But she bit her lip to hold back the angry remark that wanted to escape. There was only so much that a poor relation was allowed to say in this household, especially when it came to her cousin Penelope. And if she let Penelope see the look on her face right now, she would be in real trouble. So instead, she looked down at the dragon, who was shivering in her arms. From the tip of his snout to the end of his tail, Sir Jessamine Carnarvon Artos was only 2 feet long, and when he curled up like this against her, he formed a big ball of warmth that felt nearly the same as her old tomcat back home. But his worried golden eyes blinked up at her from a face that glittered such a deep blue and green, his scales looked like precious jewels. Given her choice of dragon, Penelope had of course chosen the prettiest one she had seen, not the cleverest, nor the calmest, which would have been far more useful. It would take a dragon with nerves of pure steel to ride calmly on Penelope's slim shoulder as she alternately shrieked with laughter or with fury and smacked him every time he accidentally slid an inch or let his claws dig into her skin. Eleanor's jaw clenched at the thought of it. If either of Eleanor's younger sisters had been there, matters would have gone very differently. Rose would have stood nose to nose with Penelope and shrieked directly back at her about her intolerable cruelty to an innocent beast. Harriet would have come up with a mathematically perfect plan to exact revenge. When their parents had died, though, 1 year earlier, a flurry of panicked letter writing had erupted in the extended family. After 6 months of heated wrangling about whose responsibility they really were, the 3 Tregarth girls had been scattered to the far corners of Britain to join different sets of relatives. Family or not, no one was willing to take on all 3 sisters at once. So that left only Eleanor to face their cousin Penelope now, alone and all too miserably aware of the practicalities of the situation, as always. It was her lifelong curse. Rose and Harry wouldn't have let practicalities hold them back. Rose was too romantic and high-minded to care. And as for Harry, well, Eleanor was certain that anyone who spent her life mastering higher mathematics simply for her own amusement was incapable of feeling intimidated by Penelope. Eleanor, though, couldn't stop thinking about exactly what would happen if she let loose all the outrage that had been building inside her for the last 6 months. As hard as she tried, she couldn't imagine any good result. All that she could imagine was the mundane reality of disaster. She would be tossed out of Hathergill Hall in disgrace, leaving no one who even tried to moderate Penelope's behavior to the servants, the poor little dragon, or anyone else who ever got in her cousin's way. And with less than 5 shillings in Eleanor's purse, Uncle John, of course, saw no need to give her an allowance, as she was already living off his generosity. Leaving Hathergill Hall wouldn't bring her freedom. It would only mean utter ruin. So she took a deep breath and unclenched her jaw. She set Sir Jessamine gently down onto the ballroom floor and said as quietly and as humbly as possible, "Perhaps you would like to take a rest, Penelope. Your nerves—" "A rest! A rest!" Penelope's voice built up in volume until Eleanor's ears rang, and Sir Jessamine scuttled behind her legs, wrapping his tail tightly around her ankles. And Eleanor's cousin has quite a bit to say in response. I'm going to skip to the end of her complaints. And then Penelope said, "Papa fobbed me off with this worthless excuse for a non-functioning dragon." Penelope pointed at Sir Jessamine with a trembling finger. His glittering green ears flattened in panic against his head. His tail tightened around Eleanor's ankles until she teetered on her feet and had to hold out her arms to keep her balance. "Penelope, please," she said, "if you could just try to be a little more patient with him." "You're doing it again." Penelope stared at her. "Listen to her, Mama. She really is pretending that it's all my fault." "I only meant," Eleanor began, "after everything I've done for you." Penelope choked in a sob. "How could you, Eleanor?" Eleanor stared at her cousin, open-mouthed. She couldn't even think of a response. "I allowed Mama and Papa to take you in despite all the horrid inconvenience. I allowed one of my maids to do your hair. I even told my friends it wasn't kind to mock you for being so grim and sour-faced all the time. I told them you couldn't help being plain and tedious. And Mama she promised that you would give me so much help with my debut that it would all be worth it in the end. Eleanor swallowed. Her mouth felt dry. There was a distant ringing in her ears, like the whistle of a steam engine charging towards her, something loud and angry and dangerous that she had never, ever given into before. Penelope didn't seem to hear it. I even let you be fitted from new gowns from my seamstress. Mama asked if I would mind it too terribly, but I said no because I was tired of you looking like a crow all the time in those terrible black gowns. Eleanor heard her own voice as if it came from very far away, beyond the ringing in her ears. Those black gowns were mourning dress, Penelope, for my year of mourning, for my parents. Well, I don't know why you bothered to change into brighter clothing once the year was up, Penelope said. It's all wasted on you anyway. It's not as if you're ever going to find a husband, are you? You are not even a Hattagirl, only a poor relation who couldn't find anyone else to take you on. Your only purpose is to help me with my debut. And instead, you're always littering and moaning at me, but Penelope this and but Penelope that. I could go mad from the endless sound of your voice. She narrowed her eyes and pointed at the dragon, who had wound himself around Eleanor's ankles. You're exactly the same as him. Non-functional. Sir Jessamine let out a low, trilling chuckle of fear, and the steam engine finally arrived. That is it. Eleanor's ears were ringing so loudly now that she could barely hear her own voice, even as it rose to a yell so dangerous and warlike she would never have suspected herself capable of creating such a sound. That is it. What? I beg your pardon? Lady Hattagirl's head jerked up as she woke from her snooze. Did someone say it was time for tea, Penelope? Penelope had scooted back a step at Eleanor's yell, but her shoulders stiffened at the sound of her mother's voice. It is not time for tea, Mama, she said. It is time for someone to explain to my cousin exactly what her place is in this household for once and for all. Thank you, Penelope, Eleanor said, but actually, there isn't the slightest need for that. She knelt down and scooped up Sir Jessamine with unaccustomed fluid grace. With the steam engine's whistle still ringing in her ears, she could have easily smashed through the windows of the elegant drawing room or picked up the piano in the corner and thrown it straight at her cousin's pretty blonde head. It posed no difficulty at all to scoop up one trembling, chuckling dragon and set him securely on her shoulder. You have made yourself perfectly clear, said Eleanor, so I shall do you the favor of removing both my non-functioning self and your non-functioning dragon from your life. Unlike you, this dragon is not a wild animal, so he at least deserves some courtesy. Oh! Penelope shrieked, Mother! Did you hear what she just said to me? Oh, dear, Lady Hattagirl moaned and put one hand over her eyes. Perched on Eleanor's shoulder, Sir Jessamine let out one last chuckle of terror, and through her ringing ears and haze of fury, Eleanor finally remembered what that sound always signified when it came from this particular dragon. Oh, no, she breathed. Hastily, she began to stroke his back. Please, Sir Jessamine, please don't, not now. But she was too late. Hot, steaming dragon slime exploded down the back of her gown, soaking through to her skin as Penelope's shrieks of outrage rattled the chandelier overhead. It wasn't quite the exit that Eleanor had hoped for, but she held her chin high as she marched out of the room with Sir Jessamine shivering on her shoulder and her wet, slimy skirts sticking to her legs at every step. So that's the end of chapter 1 of Scales and Sensibility. And what I'm giving away, if you sign up in the form, let's see if I can get it. No, it's not going to show up nicely as a cover, but it's a short story called The Wrong Foot, which is sort of a twist on what would happen if the wrong girl fit into Cinderella's slipper and had no interest in the prince. So I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you.
Oh, I literally at one point spit my water out. Fortunately, not facing the camera, but that was so funny. Thank you so much to everyone who came today. The authors will be sticking around for a bit to answer questions and to do a little chatting. Please don't forget to fill out that giveaway form, especially if you want to enter any of the giveaways or be notified about future events. And be sure to grab the handout with all the authors' information from the chat. Our next event will be March 17th at 7 p.m. U.S. Eastern Time. And I'll go ahead and post the pre-registration link in the chat so you can sign up right now and be sure not to miss our next amazing selection of stories. And now